OK，我们掌声欢迎第三天的大师班。
Good morning. Well, this is a very personal story. The relationship between myself with this painter started several years ago. Practically, I was starting to my career in cinematography. I was working on my first film, Giovinezza Giovinezza, and I already spoke with you. My, let's say, education till then was very specifically made in technology, in cinematography. Till this specific day that I was working with my young wife, still my wife today. We will do 50 years of marriage next year. In the center of Rome, there is a very important square called Piazza Navona. And we noticed a little church nearby. And usually, particularly at that time, I was entering in any church, not only for religious reason, but because the feeling in Europe, particularly in Italy, that when you go into a church, it's like when you go into a museum. In a sense that any church is built in one specific period of time, and each period reflects one specific architecture. And usually the architecture reflected the social, political, human reason of that period of time. The style is changing completely. If you have a pre-Christian church, if you have the Romanesque church, if you have the Gothic church, the Renaissance, the Baroque, etc., or Neoclassic. Different period, change of different style, and reflecting the kind of relationship between the society, between the human being and the presence of the divine on us. Rome, in this specific example, is an incredible piece of history, because you can see places that belong to 2,000 years ago, with one specific building in the way these are structured. You see those different periods of time, as I just mentioned. And practically is an open museum, the entire city practically. So we went into this little church. The church is called San Luigi dei Francesi, because it's nominated on top of San Luigi, or a character called Luigi. The property belonged to France. Let's say dei Francesi. And we came into this little church, as I mentioned to you, because I was curious to see how the architecture inside was. Usually you notice into a church different sculpture, statue, or you have a different painting or different period. Usually there is a kind of completely different atmosphere from one church to another according to the period it is built. And if you're lucky sometime when you go into a church, you might can hear also music. There may be somebody's play the organ. That day the church was very quiet, very in silence. And I noticed the church was almost completely empty, but there was a group of people on the left side of the church, and they were looking up to something. So we approached it step by step, and we noticed there was what we call a chapel, a cappella. And into this cappella there were some painting. In the center was this one. This one was also on the left side, this one on the right side. And I was shocked mainly to see particularly this painting, the one on the left side, the one we already saw yesterday, the day after, the day before. And I was totally shocked about the vision of this painting, because I never saw till that moment a painter have an incredible intuition that just with one mark of the sunlight was creating such a different atmosphere between all this design. As I mentioned to you already, I was shocked at the fact that in 9 years of study in photography and cinematography, nobody told me about the life of this painter that I discovered to be called Michelangelo Merisi, from Caravaggio. Caravaggio is a little town near Milano, where later he took the name. Like Leonardo, we call Leonardo da Vinci, from Vinci. Vinci is another little town in North Italy. At that time, most of the time, people was taking the name from where they came from. And that's become the surname later on. And the painting is called the calling of San Matthew. San Matthew at that time was somebody working for the government in Jerusalem to collecting taxes. So it was somebody very greedy. There was many thinking about money, and people paying tax. Was not a spiritual person at that moment. But in this concept, Jesus is calling him to be one of his followers. And he said, come with me. And he said, me? That's the kind of story. Originally, this chapel, when Caravaggio was called to do the painting, he was supposed to do only this painting and this painting. Somebody else was supposed to do a statue of San Matthew in the middle, but because they want to open the chapel exactly at the end of the century, of the 17th century, beginning of 17th century, 1600. Because the statue was not ready, they asked to Caravaggio to make the painting of San Matthew with the angel. That's now why, because it's there. This kind of work was a kind of, they asked to Caravaggio to do a specific painting, to have two paintings that was telling the story of San Matthew. And they have to be exactly with some specific sides, have to be square. And in the two sides of this painting, you have to tell the story. The beginning of San Matthew become a saint, a follower of Jesus, at the end, which was the sacrifice of San Matthew. As I mentioned to you, I mean, this kind of incredible intuition that the painter had to visualize with one single idea an incredible meaning, let's say. For the first time, you can see clearly light and shadows. Symbolically is past and future, humanity and divinity. subconscious, overconscious. I was so shocked about this kind of thing that from that moment on, my concept was to try to understand why he made those kind of decisions, how he could have this kind of intuition that I never saw before. Of course, it's very complex. You have time enough, energy enough, concentration enough to go really deeply into one single subject. You know, you always will be too busy. Personal reason, family reason, professional reason. You always have don't have the chance really to spend a long time to really go deeply in to discover something so important. So step by step that I was keep working. Of course, I was trying to buy any book about Caravaggio or any exhibition that they did. There are other churches in Rome with other painting of Caravaggio. I was trying to follow step by step as I was growing up as a human being and as a professionist in order to try to understand this kind of personality. And without any doubt, any professional work that happened to me, one way to another, even if I was not thinking at that painting, the painting came back. I mentioned to you already this sequence in The Conformist. The Bernardo Bertolucci explained it to me, the concept of the Plato myth of the cave, we already explained it. And in an unconscious way, I visualized that myth of Plato into this room of this is when the protagonist of The Conformist meet his own teacher and remind to him when he was teaching in Rome, he was teaching specifically about the Plato mythology. And he recreated in exactly the same atmosphere. I don't know if you saw the movie. He's closing the window of this room, leaving only one window on, a window that allowed to me to build a similar beam of light of the painting of Caravaggio in order to tell the story about those people they were prisoners in one cave. Practically I recreating the atmosphere of the cave into a room. They were forced to watching some shadows, believing that that was the reality, the only image that they knew. Bertolucci felt the need to put this kind of story into the movie. That was not originally written in the original book, wrote by Alberto Moravia, one of the greatest writers in Rome, in Italy. Because you have to make a metaphor between the myth of Plato and the kind of politic that we have at that moment in 1930, 35 in Italy. Practically, the shadows the prisoner Plato see, and they believe is reality, is what the Italian people thought that everything was told to them by the politician was the truth. But in fact, the concept of Bertolucci was that was not a truth. That was, let's say, an interpretation of reality. In fact, the teacher, in order to know what happened in the true world, went outside Italy, went to France. That was the metaphor that Bertolucci tried to create using this myth. And the more and more and more that I was continued, this is a painting of that was creating the idea of the cave. But the more I was keep working, and the more, even in an unconscious way, I was using the principle of Caravaggio, using light like a kind of sharp knife that cut the matter, the black matter, revealing some part of the scene. This is one frame of the picture called "It Is a Pity She's a Whore," directed by Giuseppe Patroni Griffi. That was 1971. And there was a story between a brother and sister falling in love between each other. And there was a tragedy story that is going to end. In fact, this story is written in the 16th century. It's about a tragedy family. Do I need to speak with someone, Giovanni?
Yes.
Sorry, gentlemen.
22009.
3274. Sorry that I have to confirm my credit card in order to take the flight tonight. That's very complicated stuff. So what I'm trying to say, that whatever movie I was doing, one way to another, the painting of Caravaggio came back to myself. Even when I was not thinking specifically to have a reference from that kind of painting. This one is one example. Sorry, I went back. This other one is another example. This is the story, is another movie that I did with, directed by Giuliano Montaldo, about the great philosopher of Giordano Bruno. The actor is Massimo Foschi, one of the greatest theater actors in Italy. This is another, this one probably could be the more specific one. In fact, as I was mentioned to you yesterday, I was trying to make this counterbalance between the church at that period. I'm talking 1600 as a period of time, of the church that was still, let's say, almost in a kind of still moment, was not really progressing into the future, and the will of Giordano Bruno. They was accused to be heretic, and he was brought to in the square in Rome, and it was burned by the church for heresy. It remained one of the most incredible symbology in the history about what the fact that if you are thinking of something different of what is the establishment, you're going to pay in this incredible will. The church recently signed the fact that they were wrong a long time ago. One other great example is the sequence that we spoke several times about Apocalypse Now and Marlon Brando coming out from darkness. Practically, one way to another, those kind of Caravaggio feeling was coming out in different films. As I mentioned to you, even if I was not trying to do any replica or any connection with Caravaggio, but there was something on my part of my own vision. In fact, a producer, an Italian producer, a lady called Ida Di Benedetto, she had the will to produce a picture about the history of Caravaggio. And she called me and said to me, we never met each other before. My dear Vittorio, I'm calling you because I want to do a movie about the life of Caravaggio, and I think only you can do it. Because in watching your movie, I can have the feeling, I can see that you have some kind of Caravaggio vision in any movie that you're doing. And she was right. I never thought before, but in watching backwards, several different images, several different occasions, those kind of feeling was coming back. From the time that she proposed me the picture to the time that finally we were able to do the picture, 7 years passed. Because from one way to another, it was difficult for her to put together the director, the distribution and the collect all the money that we need for the movie, which was not a very expensive movie. In fact, at the end, we did for Italian television, making practically a picture that was for television first, and after we become a normal film that was distributed all around the world.